Nintendo characters are iconic, and they're iconic everywhere. If you say the name Mario, or even do the "It's me, Mario," I mean, that wasn't even good, but you know exactly what I mean. And you could be from Finland or Germany or anywhere, you know Mario, and you know video games, and you know Nintendo. Well, Nintendo has other characters that are just as iconic internationally recognized, and another important example of this is Pikachu. Whether you speak French or Spanish or German or Korean or Japanese or English, Pikachu is that little yellow mouse thing from Pokémon. The same thing can't be said for something like Bulbasaur. In fact, Bulbasaur isn't its original name, that's the English translation. Its original name sounds something like Fushigi-dane. I can't really pronounce it properly since I don't speak Japanese, but you get the idea. Now, with that said, have any of you wondered how many Pokemon received a translation, at least in English, like Bulbasaur, versus got the exact same Japanese name, such as Pikachu? Because I did, and I looked into it, and I have some surprising results to share with you. Now, remember a few moments ago how I talked about accent? That's going to come into play a little bit because the characters in Japanese and in English, they don't line up one-to-one. So the exact number of Pokemon that don't have a translation can vary. So while there might be some level of subjectivity, I think we can agree that the number we end up coming up with is pretty close, if not dead on, how many Pokemon keep their name the same between English and Japanese. But first, one of my favorite games and the sponsor of this video has something really exciting to announce. As you can see on your screen right now, yes, Raid Shadow Legends is doing a collaboration with Assassin's Creed. And 5 iconic assassins from the franchise will be joining Raid, and they look fantastic just like they do in the games. We have Ezio, Edward, Bayek, Basim, and Cassandra. Cassandra is actually the first champion in a new faction, the Argonauts, which is really cool. Now, you can get these champions in various ways, such as completing dedicated events, tournaments, or summon boosts, but Ezio, all you gotta do is log into Raid for just 7 days, and you will get Ezio, who is really good. Another thing being introduced in this event is the event dungeon, where you can fight Pontiff Augustine. You can get some really cool gear by defeating him. It's called Chronophage gear. There's also other really good gear. It's well worth your time. That's one of the things I love most about Raid, the countless heroes, the various game modes. It is a ton of fun, and if you want to get into Raid, now is a perfect time. All you gotta do is click my link in the description or scan the QR code, and you can get amazing bonuses only available via my link. Right away, you'll get a starter pack that contains Grizzled Jarl, and if you reach level 15, you'll get Ugo. Of course, logging in for 7 days gets you Ezio. And then there are 6 different legendaries. You can get one of them. These are the promo codes. They're all on screen. I will recommend Ultimate Death Knight. I think he's really, really good. UD King is the promo code. And if you want to see me in Raid, I'm under the name JRose11, and you can join my clan, the Tier Listers. So let's start off with Generation 1. There are 151 Pokemon introduced in the first generation. Before I tell you the number, I want you guys to guess, even internally, kept their name rather than receiving a new translated name. Try making a list for yourself. I already gave you Pikachu, that's one. How many more are there? All right, you ready? The answer is 29 more, so a total of 30 of the 151 Generation 1 Pokemon have their names exactly the same between English and Japanese. Here is the list of the 30 Pokemon, and I'm not going to go over every single one of them, but there are some interesting observations here. Looking at the very top of the list, notice that Caterpie and Butterfree have the exact same name, but Metapod's Japanese name is actually pronounced something like Transcell. And at least according to Bulbapedia, this is based on English words, transform and cell, so theoretically they could have kept the name the same, but the translator decided that perhaps Metamorphosis, Metapod, would be something easier for kids to recognize, and Transcell, or Transel as it may have been pronounced, probably would be too difficult for them to understand, and I actually agree with this. But speaking of Pokemon whose names seem to be puns on English, I was stunned to see Arbok on this list. I mean, Arbok, in English it makes sense, it's cobra, but does it make sense in Japanese? Well, notice how Ekans isn't on the list, and this is fascinating. Ekans' Japanese name is just the word for boa reversed in Japanese, and it would likely be translated as Arbo if it were brought over to English. They decided instead to reverse the word snake. Honestly, it's just a crazy coincidence that cobra in English spelled backwards would be Arbok, which sounds very similar to Arbo. Hence, Arbok, based on an English word, was kept in English, but Ekans, or Arbo, was dropped in favor of Ekans, probably to distinguish the Pokemon more. Which is something, and maybe I'll talk about this in another video, I noticed done far more in the English translation than the original Japanese, where the names, in some cases, are really generic. Moving down the list, you'll notice the entire Nidoran line is unchanged. King and Queen are obviously English words, but where Nido comes from is actually somewhat of a mystery. Bulbapedia gives a few explanations, but this one isn't entirely surprising. That about sums it up for Gen 1. There's a couple more things I want to point out. One of them being that aside from the Golbat line, the Paris line, and the Kabuto line, all the other Pokemon on this list that can evolve, one of the forms retains its original Japanese name, and the other gets a new English translation. So Meowth was not in Japanese, but Persian was. Psyduck wasn't, Golduck was. Mankey was, Primeape wasn't, etc., etc. Mew and Mewtwo, there's an interesting thing there because most people will say that the reason they're called Mew and Mewtwo is because they're cat-like and mew. You know, it sounds like meow. It's an automatopoeia for a noise a cat makes. But apparently, the French localizer Julien Bardakov, who I believe voiced Luigi in Mario Kart 64, he was told that it actually was not based off that, and Bulbapedia speculates it is based off mutant, mutation, or new, or the Japanese word sounding like Mew that means wonderful or exquisite, and Mewtwo just having the word to, an English word. Keep in mind that most children in Japan at this time probably didn't speak much, if any, English, so throwing on the word to just made it sound weird and fantastical, while for us, it's just literally the number 2. One last Gen 1 observation, I always have to bring this up. Originally, Gyarados was going to be renamed as Skullkraken. Now, I think Skullkraken is a very goofy name, but I also really love it. From an English speaker's perspective, Gyarados, like Pikachu or Raichu, doesn't mean anything. It's actually very confusing reading the Bulbapedia name origin. There are a lot of words it seems to be based on. So overall, it's just a fantastic creature with a cool sounding name. And if I'm being perfectly honest, Skullkraken doesn't make a ton of sense for Gyarados, considering it isn't ghost type, it doesn't have a real skull theme, nor is it based on a kraken, it's kind of based on a water dragon. So I guess we'll let it slide. Alright, I was originally going to move on to Johto, but this is J-Rose from slightly in the future here, and I did a little bit more digging into why certain names that seemed so similar were considered different for the purposes of this list. The perfect examples would be Omanite and Omastar. Now, I'm not an expert in Japanese, but the way Japanese words are formed and the way English words are formed are different. So there's going to be slight differences in pronunciation. That's why people from Japan, when they speak English, may have a bit of an accent and vice versa. But Omanite and Omastar, you would think should be transliterated as Omanite and Omastar. And yet we see Omnite and Omstar. Where are these names coming from? Why are these off the list? Well, I actually found out that Game Freak actually does trademark the official Romaji names, and their spelling is used on official merchandise and promotional material when in English. So let's go to the other fossil Pokemon for a second. Kabuto is Kabuto in Japanese, but Kabutops, if it were translated literally, would be Kabutopsu. But the official Romaji name is Kabutops. Thus, it is the same. In the case of Omanite and Omastar, clearly the official intended pronunciation, if it were in English, is Omnite and Omstar. And remember, when it comes to localizations, it is almost never the developers and the people who made these names initially doing the translation. Sometimes there's collaboration for sure, but oftentimes there's outside people. So we're seeing what the developers intended the names to be if they were in English, and clearly there is a disconnect here, and these aren't the only ones. Again, I'm not an expert in Japanese, but I think a lot of us who've been exposed to the Japanese language know that R's and L's are a little more interchangeable than they are in English. So Lapras is Lapless. But again, this is the official trademark by Game Freak, and it's different. We made it an R. Another example of names that are so similar to what we got but not the same are Dodo and Dodorio, clearly based on the dodo flightless bird. Doduo and Dodo clearly are different, but Dodrio and Dodorio, Dodorio is how you would say Dodrio likely in Japanese. So you might think Dodrio should be the translation, but Game Freak says it's Dodorio, and they're the ones who make the call and the trademark, so it's different. And the final Pokemon I want to talk about in Generation 1 that you might think should just be the same thing is Gengar. In Japanese, Genga, it's so similar, but the official Romaji translation is Gengar, not Gengar. So this is a case where it was slightly changed to make it sound a little bit better to North American speakers, and technically it's different. And so we have thus concluded that the original figure given, 30, is in fact the proper number of Pokemon that have the same name in both English and Japanese. Now let's finally move on to Generation 2. 100 new Pokemon were introduced, and once again I ask the question, how many of those do you think kept their names from Japanese? Pause here if you want to guess. The answer is 14 or 15. We'll talk about it. Unambiguously, the following Pokemon have the exact same name: Meganium, Ariados, Crobat, Pichu. In the case of Crobat and Pichu, it makes sense. The Zubat line and the Pikachu line both were untranslated, so it made sense. Delibird, Kingdra, Seadra was untranslated and makes sense. Porygon 2, just like Porygon. Elekid, Miltank, which I did look into. It is based on milk and tank, but at least to this point, none of these sound particularly anglicized. It isn't surprising they just come straight from their original Japanese names. Probably the least surprising are the legendaries: Raikou, Entei, Suicune, Lugia, Celebi. Hey, wait a minute. What about Ho-Oh? What the heck does that mean in English? What was it called in Japanese? Oh, you got to be kidding me. So I put this into Google Translate, and it seems to be pronounced something like Ho. And again, my Japanese is non-existent. It basically sounds like a slightly different pronunciation, but it's spelled differently. It doesn't have the dash. I don't know. I guess it's different. But if you think that's nitpicky, you're not ready. Right now, we have 14 unambiguously identical Pokemon because both their names and their spellings match from the Romaji trademark to the trademark in English. In Gen 2, for some reason, however, very, very imperceptibly and irrelevant changes were made to some of these names, which technically, for the purpose of this list that was compiled, make them different. But I'm gonna say we might want to make our own list and include them. Let's start from the top. Chikorita is called Chikorita in Romaji, but with a C. Seriously, it's the same frickin' name. Bayleaf is Bayleaf, but spelt like leaf instead of... I don't know why they put two E's there, to make it cutesy. Are we seriously considering these different? No. So right now, let's raise that number to 16. Once again, we have the RL ambiguity with Lediba or Rediba and Redian. We already considered that different enough in Generation 1. I think that's fair. So even though it feels slightly like a technicality, they're different enough, I'm not going to count them. So still good. Then we get to lantern. Are you kidding me? In Japanese, it's just spelt like a lantern. In English, they changed it to a U, and I don't know why I just said, I don't understand why they did it. I do understand, for trademark reasons. Bayleaf with 2 E's is a Pokémon, unambiguous. While it's not one word, which is why I didn't see it, Bayleaf is a thing that exists in the world, just like a lantern. So if you make it a U, it's a Pokemon's name. And remember how we talked about a lot of the Japanese names being quite literal? Here's a case where a difference was made. But it's the same thing. It's called lantern. The spirit of this is, are they different? No. And it's not our fault English has like a billion vowels that can all do 80,000 different things depending on your accent and what language it originates from. I'm counting lantern, I don't care. If this was an audio podcast and I didn't spell it out for you, you couldn't tell the difference, it should count. 17 Pokemon. Our next Pokemon, however, changing the letter actually does make sense because to a native English speaker, Togepi could be pronounced Togepi. Oftentimes, the Y at the end of that would make an I sound. So ironically, changing it to an I makes it an E. English is such a weird language, man. But I do get the decision there, but it's pronounced Togepi in Japanese. It's Togepi. We're counting it. I mean, this isn't a case of Fushigi-Dane and Bulbasaur, where one is a pun and one is a pun in Japanese. Togepi doesn't mean anything in English. It's just a cool sounding name. It's from Japanese. Our next 2 Pokemon we're going to add to the list are Mareep and Marill. Mareep is spelled very weirdly in Romaji. Makes sense why you'd want 2 E's, not Mareep. I mean, I suppose that's Mareep, but like that's spelled really weird. And then Marill got a second L. It's the same thing. They're on the list. I was on the fence about this one, but after putting its Japanese characters into Google Translate, Aipom is pronounced basically Apom in Japanese, but spelt very weirdly. I mean, neither is spelt like ape, but yeah, they're both pronounced the exact same. It's supposed to be pronounced Apom, so it's Apom. Done. I'm going to start speeding through these. Unknown is spelt like the word unknown in Romaji. It drops the K to be unique. Same thing. Actually, hold up. It's really not. This is a case where the Romaji makes way more sense. We pronounce it like unknown. There's 2 distinct N sounds. Unknown. We don't say unknown. And frankly, anyone who says that, it just sounds wrong. So I get it. It's for trademarks. Why not just put 2 N's there? Maybe they thought that looked weird. Like, I don't know. Anyway, it's the same thing. That's how it's supposed to be pronounced. And the Romaji does it better. Now, here's an example of one I'm not going to count, even though it seems like the same thing as Apom. Gligar. This is clearly in English, Gligar. And that is a conscious choice. If they wanted Gligar, like with Gengar, they would have used the letters. This isn't like Apom where it's a different spelling, but most likely the same pronunciation. It's hard to know without someone speaking the Romaji, but Apom, you can spell the word palm like that. Probably you'd put an L there, but it's close enough. This one isn't. This is Gligar. Unless you're from the UK, in which case you might pronounce it Gliga. But like I said, there's going to be some subjectivity here, and honestly, after thinking about leaving Gligar off and looking at Apom spelling again, PAM does not make an sound. It needs an L there to make the sound. That would be Apam. So Apom is actually getting taken off the list. I know, this is a very confusing endeavor. I missed when we were in Kanto, but we have 21 Pokemon now, the 14 that have identical spelling, and then 7 more that we have deemed close enough. Speaking of others that aren't close enough, Granbull could have been called Granbull, but they called it Granbulu. That's not close enough. But Heracross with 1 S, that is close enough. It's coming on the list. Another one that's coming on the list is Macargo, and if you're not super familiar with English or French, you might be surprised. Isn't that Macargot? But no, because escargot is a French loanword, the T is unpronounced, and it's actually a very clever pun. I don't know why they dropped it. Maybe because they thought kids didn't know that, and thus they'd call it Macargot. So I guess that makes sense, but good on you, Game Freak. That's really clever. Macargo, though, is pronounced Macargo. It's on the list. But now we've gone to one I don't want to do, because how do you pronounce this Pokemon's name? Is it Mantine, based on a manatee? Mantine? I've always called it Mantine, and if you put the Japanese letters in a translator, it's Mantine. AI can make that sound, but often would be maintain. But I don't think that's what they're going for. This took me down a linguistic rabbit hole I wish I didn't go down, but in a lot of foreign languages, adding an A sound and an I sound makes I, which makes sense if we pronounce both vowels separately, mantine or mantine, which is what they were going for. Even though if you were to read this in English, it would be maintain. Y'all can blame messed up English grammar and the great vowel shift for making my life harder, but because they were clearly going for the pronunciation of mantine, and this is just an instance of English being weird, it's gonna go on the list. Yay. Alright, is that it? Are we done? No. We still have Donphan, which is spelt with an F versus a PH. I mean, come on. Are we done now? Yeah. I'm gonna leave Ho off because the dash does change your pronunciation. It would be pronounced something like Ho. You know, like the O's would kind of blend together. I think the dash actually does make a bit of a difference here and does change. And listening to the Japanese translation and the spelling, I don't know. I know they were going for something that's like Ho-Oh, but that stop, that dash stop, I do think is significant. But if you did want to add Ho-Oh, that would make 25 Pokemon almost as many as Generation 1. I'm going to have 24, which is, well, since out of 100, 24% of Pokemon kept their name. It's not bad. All right, wow, this video is lasting a lot longer than I intended. I thought this would be a quick 10-minute video. Thank you, grammar and language. Let's move on to Gen 3. We still have 6 more generations to go. Oh my god. But thankfully in Gen 3, there's way less ambiguous Pokemon. So I'm going to have you take a quick guess. Take a second. Great. Out of 135 new Pokemon, Generation 3 has 28 of them that unambiguously have the exact same spelling and pronunciation as Japanese. Let's take a quick look at some of the Pokemon that are unchanged. We get Pelipper, Ralton Curlia but not Gardevoir, Nosepass, which I'm surprised, Minun but not Plusle, we'll talk about that, Illumise but not Volbeat, Roselia, Vibrava, and Flygon but not Trapinch, Zangoose but not Viper, Lunatone and Solrock, Armaldo, Tropius, Absol. I mean, you can just read down the list, and as you'll notice, a trend of the legendaries almost always having their names retained. The big exception being the Gen 1 birds, which got that uno, dos, tres pun, but thus far, all the legendaries we can see have their names kept the same. But there are some weird omissions here, like Trapinch or Volbeat or Plusle. So let's go through the edge cases and talk about those. Poochyena is just a difference in spelling. Both of them will achieve the same results, but to an English speaker, the official translation looks a little better. It's the same thing. That's how it's pronounced in Japanese. I'm going to add it to the list. Now, 2 Pokemon I want to bring up that aren't edge cases, but I was stunned that were actually translated is Makuhita and Hariyama. But I think I know why. If you were to spell Makuhita's Romaji name in the games, it would be too many characters. Maku no Shita. Rather than trying to shorten it by one character, they just shortened it by even more and made it Makuhita, which doesn't mean anything in English, and thus I was surprised it's a translated name, but it's just a shortened name because Makunoshita only requires 5 letters, just like Hariyama's name in Japanese. This one they could have kept the same. It's 10 characters, but yeah, they decided to shorten it as well. I was stunned that these weren't their names in Japanese. Like, if I had to think of the Pokemon names that sounded the most not English, Pikachu, Raichu, and stuff like Makuhita and Hariyama definitely don't sound like they come from English, but hey, you learn something new every day. As you'll notice, I'm going by Pokedex order here. Plusle is another case of L and R switching. It would be pronounced Prasle. Clearly they were going for Plusle since it's plus sign, but it is what it is there. Volbeat's also interesting, where V and B, Barubeat. You can tell where Volbeat comes from, but it's not Volbeat. Wailord is very similar, Wailo, but that's not Lord. That's similar, but not even close enough to make the list. Just interesting, thought I'd bring that up. And in terms of ones that are even slightly similar enough to consider, that's it. Gorobus, remember we said what happened there? It's pretty different. Sakurabus, it's not similar at all. Lovedisk is Lovecus. There's similarities there, but not list-worthy. So it seems like Gen 2 alone had all these cases of changed spelling, which makes me angry because in Gen 1 we got to talk about all the creative reasons why Pokemon were called what they were called, and now we have to spend our time figuring out, does AI make I? Does AM Palm or Pam? Johto, you might have been my favorite region as a kid, but for this video, you suck. But speaking of regions I liked as a kid, Platinum was my favorite game growing up. We're going to move on to Generation 4. There were 107 Platinum Pokemon introduced. I want you guys to try and guess how many you think kept their names. The answer is 9. Well, at least if we're referring to unambiguously spelled and pronounced the same and not legendaries. The total number is actually 19. Because, like we've been talking about, there seems to be a concerted effort to keep legendary names the same across all regions, especially since from Generation 2 onward, legendary Pokemon would be on boxes, and they've started making a much bigger deal about those, and of course, the mythical Pokemon. So what 9 Pokemon have the exact same pronunciation and spelling? Luxio, Roserade, Pachirisu. That one I'm not surprised. With Makuhita, it's another one that just sounds like something that's in Japanese. Cherrim, Gabite, Riolu, but not Lucario. We'll talk about that. Hippopotas, Togekiss, and Rotom. Rotom is surprising because like Arbok, it's just an English word, motor, spelled backwards. But you know it's not going to be that easy. What the heck happened to Lucario? That doesn't sound super anglicized. Are there any other Pokemon that should be on the list? Yes. Before I talk about those, I do want to point out 2 that are very similar, but not exactly the same. Weasel and Floatzel. Weasel, I guess a buoyant weasel, and Floatzel, a floating weasel. Good puns. And you'd be surprised that in Japanese, you can tell with Weasel, they were very clearly going for that, but buoy is a word in English, and you'd pronounce that buoysel. It's similar, but buoy is a word, so you would pronounce that buoy. And Floatzel, they didn't put a T. So I'm not going to count them. They're just not similar enough to be unambiguously pronounced the same way. Honestly, if they had put a Z instead of an S, I may have let Buizel slide. Because the Japanese translation, you can clearly tell they're going for that, but the Romaji spelling is just too different. That's not how you would pronounce that. And that's what they chose, so not on the list. No, the Pokemon that's going to be added to the list is Skorupi. Really, a K and a C? Do we need both those letters? They do the same thing. Yeah. Yay, Latin script. Leafeon and Glaceon are interesting. I didn't mention this, but the Eon thing is an English convention. Speaking of Eevee, I actually forgot to talk about it in Kanto, so we're going to go back. Eevee is so similar in Japanese. Its Romaji is Eevee, and you can tell that's what they're going for, but Eevee, Vui, doesn't make an E sound. There's that U there. That matters. So it didn't make the list, and I just forgot to mention it. With that said, Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon are known as Thunders, Booster, and Showers. The Eon thing is actually based on Eevee's beta name, Eon. So originally, Eevee was going to be called something completely different. I mean, did you ever stop to think about why the Eon suffix makes any sense? Eon is a length of time. The evolutions have nothing to do with that. But when you consider that Eevee was supposed to be called Eon, Vaporeon, Vapor Eevee, Leafeon, Leafy Eevee, and in Japanese it's Leafia, which is so similar, and you can see they liked the idea in English. The Eons sounded really cool, not like showers. So in my opinion, this is an example of where the English translations have actually had an impact on the Japanese naming, at least down the line, which is pretty cool. Doesn't happen that often. But alright, we've deviated in Kanto long enough. Let's get back to Sinnoh. Before we get to the legendaries, there's just two Pokemon I want to talk about. The first is Lucario. I mean, I've played Smash Bros. In Japanese before. How the heck isn't it on the list? It was a mistake. This is why you always need to double check your source material, guys. Lucario is going to be on the list, bringing the unambiguous official number to 10. And finally, Skuntank doesn't have the N in Romaji. That's different enough. So 10 is all we have for non-legendaries. But what about the legendaries? You may have figured out that 10 of them have their names carried over from Japanese, but some of them don't, like the Lake Guardians. Mesprit and Azelf are known as Emrit and Agnome in Romaji. Uxie, or Yuxie, is a bit of a different story. English is a complicated language. When you see a U at the start of a word, it often makes an sound like Uxie. It can make a U sound like in unicorn, or can make an U sound like Utrecht from the Netherlands. In fact, most of the time it makes an U sound, it's the name of a place from somewhere else. But which one is right, and what was Yuxie or Uxie or Oxie supposed to be? Well, the Romaji helps us. It was clearly U, and it's spelt that way, unambiguously so. So, should it make the list? Yeah, it should. It's Yuxie in English, it's Yuxie in Japanese, it's Yuxie. It's on the list. But Mesprit and Azelf aren't. And that's it for talking about Gen 4. All the other Pokemon are unambiguously the same in Japanese, except for Arceus or Arceus, but considering no one can decide how it's supposed to be pronounced, in Japanese it's clearly Arceus, but who's to say, and it's spelt the exact same. So Arceus may be the only example of where the spelling in the Romaji and the English is the same, but the pronunciation in Japanese is unambiguously a s, and in English, it is officially a k, like the ARC phone. That's why it's a pun. But yeah, interesting stuff. Alright guys, this video's already gotten half an hour long. Let's get to Unova. You want to guess how many non-legendary Pokemon out of 156? Well, that's total Pokemon. Not sure how many Pokemon there are without legendaries, but the answer is 5. Mana, Musharna, Arkin, Zorua, and Zoroark are the only non-legendary Pokemon to have their names both spelled and pronounced the exact same. That's kind of crazy. Even crazier, after 3 generations of all these edge cases, there really isn't much of that in Generation 5. Not to spoil things, but it seems like at this point, there was a concerted effort by the English language teams to make each name a pun and very distinct from their Japanese equivalents. In the first 4 generations, both Gen 1 and 4, around 20% of the Pokemon were exactly the same, and in Generation 3 it was 21.5%, Generation 2 it was a quarter of them. In Generation 5, even when we account for legendaries, it's just under 9%. Because there's far less drawing on the Japanese name to make the English name, there's far fewer edge cases or mistranslation/pronunciation questions. Herdier is kind of close. In fact, kind of as a joke, I pronounce it Herdier, like it's a French word, but I think it's pronounced Herdier, right? Now, when putting Herdier's Japanese characters into Google Translate, it sounds something similar to Haderia, but the Romaji is Herdery. I think. Anyway, none of that is herdier, it's just the closest we get. There's a couple Pokemon that get even closer. Zebstrika is something like, again, I don't have an official pronunciation, but Zebrika, I think, so very similar. And Gigalith is something like, probably something like Gigayath, kind of a pun on Gaia and Giga and So the English names clearly drew from those, but they're still noticeably different. But you did know there had to be at least one Pokemon where we got the annoying, spelled slightly different problem. At first glance, I didn't think there were any, but then I thought about Darumaka. I mean, that doesn't sound English at all. I know Daruma is a Japanese term, and sure enough, Darumaka in Romaji just has a second K. Wonderful. Remember, Arkin was one of the few non-legendaries that had its name maintained. Archeops doesn't have a P. They added a P, like Archaeopteryx. Cool. It's different. The Gothita line is interesting. The names were clearly changed. It's Gothamu, Gothamiru, and Gotharusel in Japanese instead of Gothita, Gotharita, and Gothitelle. But you can see they were going for the same concept here. Just changed the suffixes and made it shorter, similar to what they did with Makuhita and Hariyama. Although suffixes ia and l that we're more familiar with in the English-speaking world. On the other hand, sometimes things were changed that didn't have to be, like Escavalier, escargot, and cavalier. Both of those are words that we use in English, but they come from French. And the Japanese name, Chevalier, which means a knight, it's the same root as cavalier, and escargot. So they just kind of flipped the prefix and the suffix for some reason. I don't know why. I think Chevargo sounds amazing, but Escavalier definitely would ring true to English speakers. There is one more Pokemon I've been meaning to talk about, Emolga. In Japanese, it is very clearly and unambiguously Imonga. But it was changed, and Emolga was translated as the official Romaji name. I don't understand enough about Japanese. Can you possibly pronounce this as Emolga? And I believe there was a past trademark for Imonga, so I'm very confused, but it's on the list because, I mean, this is official, right? How can you argue with a trademark translation? I don't speak Japanese, who am I to argue? I think that's all I want to say about the non-legendaries. Let's get to the legendaries. Terrakion, Virizion, those are both exactly the same from Japanese, but not Cobalion. And that's true. Cobalion is Cobalon. The Eon wasn't a part of it. I think in Japanese it's the on part that was the suffix that linked them all together, but because two of them ended in E, I guess they decided in English just make it consistent. And speaking of keeping suffixes the same, the forces of nature have a completely different suffix in Japanese. Os instead of us. So Tornadus, Thunderous, and Landorus are known as Landloss, Voltalos, and Tornalos. Honestly, this is a pretty big step for the translation team because not since Generation 1 have all three of a trio had their names completely redone for the English version. And honestly, I think it works. I think the English names sound better in English, and I'm sure the Japanese names sound fine as well. I just think these work, and Thunder versus Volt, I think actually is more fitting for Thunderous. The rest of the legendaries, however, all have their names spelled and pronounced exactly the same, and so we can move on to Generation 6. We're almost done. Only 72 Pokemon were introduced in Generation 6, the lowest amount of any generation to date. And, unsurprisingly, it thus will also have the smallest amount of Pokemon that maintain their names from their Japanese counterparts. Sticking with non-legendaries, how many Pokemon do you think have their names untranslated? The answer is only 4 this time. We have gone from dozens to a handful to 3. Floette, Florges, Gogoat, and Dedenne. Notice a trend here of all the Pikachu clones having their names kept over from their Japanese equivalents. The thing is though, remember that these are just the Pokemon that are unambiguously spelled and pronounced the same. There are some edge cases in Gen 6, and there's some more we need to add to the list in my opinion. Before we do, let me mention that Talonflame's Japanese name is Fiero, which sounds very much like Fearow, which is interesting that two bird Pokemon that are caught early in the game have such similar names in different languages across, 6 generations? Just kind of weird stuff. Now, in terms of adding Pokemon, thank goodness there's only one edge case to consider, and one other that we're not going to add, but it's very similar. I guess I can talk about that one first. Vivillon is Vivian in Romaji. Very similar, but different. Unless Vivillon was meant to be pronounced Vivian, but I don't think it is. I don't know. I've always pronounced it Vivillon, but actually that raises a very interesting question. Maybe we should add it to the list. But the one that absolutely needs to be added is Flabebe. They just don't put the accents in Romaji. Does Romaji even need accents? English almost never uses them. The accent aigu is very important in French spelling, but it almost always dropped. Even something like naive that's supposed to have those 2 dots above the I, that's always dropped. We just don't like to spell things with accents in English, so yeah, that's the exact same thing. It's on the list. And funny enough, by adding Flabebe to the list, the percentage of Pokemon that were left untranslated is actually quite a bit higher now than Generation 5, 9.62% for Gen 5, and 13.89% now for Gen 6. But hold on, we haven't even talked about the legendaries yet. Aren't there some edge cases there? No, because there's very few legendaries in Gen 6. There's no legendary trio. There's just Xerneas, Yveltal, and then the third legendary, Zygarde, all of which are spelt the exact same. Diancie, Hoopa, and Volcanion are the only mythicals. They're spelt and pronounced exactly the same too. I love you, Kalos. You may be the region I am least familiar with because I've played your games the least, but you made me do very little work. I'm grateful. Let's move on to Gen 7 and Alola. 88 Pokemon were introduced, a ton of them were legendaries, and yet very, very, very few of them actually got translated. In total, and this may shock you, only 10 Pokemon received a translation, with only one of them not being a legendary, Dedenne. The other Pokemon are Type Null, not Silvally. In Romaji, it's Silvadi, very different, or different enough. Cosmog, but not Cosmoem. Cosmoem is known as Cosmovum, probably a pun on ovum, which is probably why they changed it. Solgaleo and Lunala are untranslated, but all of the Ultra Beasts are. Necrozma, Magearna, and Marshadow, the mythical Zeraora, and then the Pokemon Go Pokemon Meltan and Melmetal. That's it. While you might think, what about the Tapus? Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, Tapu Fini? That sounds like it could be Japanese. In Japanese, they're known as the Kapus, and it's Kokeko, which is similar, Tetefu, Bulul, and Rehire, or I don't know. That's how it's spelled, Rehire. But are you sure that's it, J-Rose? No one else? Alright, I held out on you. Mimikyu has an extra K in Romaji. We're going to add it to the list. But that's actually it. Since so few Pokemon were introduced, Gen 5 still has the record for the fewest Pokemon that maintained their original Japanese names, but as we get to the Nintendo Switch generations, that's about to change fast. Welcome to Galar, Gen 8. 96 Pokemon were introduced. 4 more and it would have been the first triple digits since Generation 5. Very, very few Pokemon maintain their names from Japanese. Just 8 Pokemon total. 3 are not legendary, 5 are. Have any idea what Pokemon kept their name? Well, one of them I actually added to the list myself. Morpeko and Duraludon, those are spelt and pronounced the same. Wooloo, they use 2 U's. That would still make an oo sound, so I'm counting Wooloo. In terms of legendaries, Zacian and Zamazenta are the same in Japanese, but shockingly, Eternatus, the boss monster, it's called something completely different. I think it's pronounced Mugendina or something like that, but nothing like Eternatus. The other Pokemon are Zarude, Regieleki, and Regidrago. Remember, Regirock, Regice, and Registeel also kept their Japanese names. That's it. The only Pokemon that comes close is Inteleon, and this is another case of L and R being switched. Interion in Romaji, Inteleon in English. Nothing else is even remotely close. I mean, Cramorant is literally ooh. It's 2 U's. What the heck? And before someone looks up all these names and complains, yes, Dorapult is, I guess, a little similar to Dragapult. So when I said not even slightly similar, I was exaggerating a little bit, but like, alright, fine. Now, some of you might be a little surprised about Urshifu. It definitely doesn't sound English, but its origin, just like a lot of origins in Gen 6 are from French, and Gen 5 are made to sound vaguely Hawaiian, Urshifu's name origin, according to Bulbapedia, is a mix of Ursus, Latin for bear, and Shifu, which is Chinese for master, or Kung Fu, which is also a Chinese word. So, it isn't an English word, but it's also not a Japanese, and so in Japanese, it's called something to the effect of Wulao. I don't really know, but it's not Urshifu. And I can see the home stretch. We're almost done. Just Paldea. And I'm just gonna finish this quickly. There are only 5 Pokemon that kept their names from Japanese. Unsurprisingly, Koraidon and Miraidon, both of those are the same. Ogerpon and Terapagos, those are the same. And just one non-legendary Pokemon, Scovillain. Who would have thought? The Treasures of Ruin all have different names. The Paradox Pokemon all have completely different names. The only Pokemon that were even close was the Pawmi line. Pawmi is known as Pawmo, which is very confusing. Pawmo is known as Pawmot. And Pawmot is known as Parmot. Oh gosh. Now, I realize the OT can be silent because of French, but if you look at the direct Japanese translation, that T is definitely being pronounced. So it is definitely Pawmo, Pawmot, and Parmot instead of Pawmi, Pawmo, Pawmot. Confusing, yes, but over this is... I cannot believe I spoke for 45 minutes on Pokemon translations. I hope this was even vaguely interesting to some of you. And don't forget to use my Raid Shadow Legends link in the description or scan my QR code to get insane bonuses for new players, including 2 epic champions. And I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.